Good day, everybody. Dave Walker here with the Beta SMB Institute. And this is a session that I have looked forward to recording for weeks because I think you're going to be fascinated by what Dr. Chloe Carmichael has to say. Now, I met her in a podcast that I was doing with my good friend Melinda Emerson, the small biz lady. But you have likely seen Dr. Chloe on CNN and a variety of different networks out there talking about this notion of harnessing nervous energy, and specifically for high functioning people, which you are, and many of you are in our audience, if not all of you. And I want to give you, Dr. Chloe, first of all, the opportunity to give us a brief background on you and what you do. You're not just a clinical psychologist and author, you're a businesswoman. Give us a little bit about your background.
Sure. Thanks, Dave. So, yeah, I realize it's kind of an unusual background. So, I started off as a yoga teacher many years ago. I then became a clinical psychologist, which means I have a PhD in clinical psychology. And then when I started my own business, I started interacting with the media a lot, which led to, as you mentioned, a lot of different network appearances to talk about nervous energy and mental wellness. And along the way, my business started doing over $1 million a year in annual revenue, which enabled me to join the Entrepreneurs Organization, which has been a great place for me to just keep growing as a business person. So, for me, as a psychologist who is interested in goals and high functioning people, as you mentioned, the entrepreneurial space with business people is really a rich area of interest for me. So, it's great to be here with you.
Well, I want to start off by asking you really a plain question. What is nervous energy?
Yes, so that's a great question. So, nervous energy is kind of my own label for what I noticed a lot of type A people had. So, my practice started in New York City on Park Avenue. I was getting a lot of very stressed out people that had some anxiety, but they were also very high achievers. And I found that although they wanted help to manage their anxiety and manage their stress, they also had a sense that part of this little edge that they had was something that they didn't want to get rid of. It was actually a source of energy, and I'm calling it nervous energy because the healthy function of anxiety is actually to stimulate preparation behaviors. So if we can start to kind of reframe sometimes anxiety or stress as potentially actually a little tickle, a little boost of adrenaline, a little gift from Mother Nature that we just need to point it in the right direction, we can actually get more done and be more productive, but also have more fulfillment at the same time.
So how do some of the dark sides of nervous energy manifest?
Well, I think that they tend to manifest actually in people who are uncomfortable with the idea of acknowledging that anything does make them at all nervous, right? So high functioning people, and just in case anyone doesn't know what that is in psychology, it's basically just people who are able to lead what many of us consider a normal life, right? So if you're not in and out of the psychiatric hospital, you're not in and out of the jail system, you're not struggling with thoughts of harm to self or others. You're able to set an alarm clock and be somewhere on time, right? In the psychology world, that's high functioning people. And so a lot of high functioning people have a hard time acknowledging when they are a little stressed or when they're on a challenge, because it is a gift to be able to actually put your emotions aside and power through things. However, as you said, the dark side can happen when we go beyond just putting our emotions aside to deal with things, when we actually disconnect from even acknowledging that we have those emotions in the first place. I compare it to like a runner who can run through the pain, which is great, as opposed to a runner who doesn't even realize that they're in pain because they black out their awareness. The difference is that the person who realizes what he's doing makes sure to get some, good massages and take good care of himself after the run, kind of debrief. Whereas the person who disconnects from the pain completely doesn't even get to ever attend to it and take care of it. And that's when we start seeing things like somebody who's always in nervous energy, who's disconnecting from that. You might find yourself suddenly procrastinating a lot. You might find yourself very irritable and not sure why. You might find that you just suddenly don't really feel connected and fulfilled by what you're doing, like that hamster on a wheel type of a feeling. So that's why, again, for me, when we can start to recognize that anxiety and stress actually signify that we have an investment in something, that we really care about what we're doing, we just need to shape that energy in the right way.
So I'd like to make an appointment, please.
Well, that's actually why I wrote the book, because my office now gets calls literally from all over the world, and it's just not possible, even though I employ other therapists. But a lot of people just really wanted specifically to talk to me, which obviously isn't possible for supply and demand. And I found that writing this book was a way for me to share myself with people who may or may not, even need or want to necessarily come for an appointment. One of the positive things actually about nervous energy and, anxiety in general is that people with that are actually really well helped through self-help, because that high level of conscientiousness, that attention to detail, is what will prompt them to make sure that they read the whole book. There's 9 techniques and each has little step by steps. Somebody who has that extra nervous energy will actually read the steps, do the steps, that kind of stuff. So the book, I think, is a nice way. We also have some, video master classes and things that I'm putting together. So people can come to nervousenergybook.com if they are interested in doing more than, what the book offers. But the book is a good starting point.
Well, all kidding aside, I've read the book and I got so much out of it. I shared it with my wife, who's also very much a high functioning uh, type A personality, runs global training for Accenture. So the two of us are very much the prototypes of nervous energy driven people, to say the least.
Beautiful.
So give us self-help, got it. But self-diagnosis, what are when you obviously have the benefit of a kind of a list of questions that you go through as you're intaking someone into your practice. What are some of the steps that people should go through to self-diagnose of whether or not they frankly have some issues with nervous energy?
Hmm. Well, as a clinical psychologist, I have to be careful around words like diagnose, right?
Right,
So
right.
it's
Got it.
important to remember that, this is not a replacement for psychotherapy and there's no actual diagnosis.
Duly
But
noted.
if you were, maybe asking yourself if this would maybe be the kind of book for you, it would be, for example, do you have a mind that can be like a dog with a bone? And once you get your mind stuck on something, it's kind of sticking there. And that can be a blessing or a curse, right? It can be a blessing when there's a time that we need to totally be focused on something. It can be a curse when the event is over, but we're still, kind of ruminating on it in our mind. Or
Mm.
if you're the kind of person who feels like your wheels are always turning, your mental wheels are always turning, and it's hard to just, turn it off and let go sometimes. Or if you keep taking on new challenges, which is a great thing, but then you kind of start asking yourself, why am I really doing this? Where is the emotional fulfillment? I mean, honestly, that in itself is actually a high functioning question, right? So I
Mhm.
want to try to reframe some of the worries or concerns that people with nervous energy often have as actually signs of their strengths, that maybe they just need a little tweaking.
Got it. So do you notice there's in the positive side of nervous energy, looking back at the early stages of my career, I would say those were actually the attributes that made me successful, that helped me advance. As I've gotten older, I've started to realize that those same exact capabilities or even skills are the ones that I ruminate on the most, the ones that I kind of pause on and go, wait a minute, there seems to be a little bit of a dark side to that. Do you notice that there's really kind of a at different stages of life, you're more aware of the bright side of nervous energy versus the dark side of nervous energy?
Definitely. So there's 3 reasons why that would be, Dave, and I think that they'll all be pretty intuitive for you. So the first reason is that when you were a much younger person, the executive lobe was actually not fully formed yet, right? So the executive lobe is the part of the brain that thinks about future consequences, that thinks about deadlines, all of that kind of stuff as the executive, kind of implies, right? And so when you're 18, 19, just trying to make sure you don't forget about your senior project, or when
Mhm.
you're 20 and you're like, oh, go to school and the class, I don't know, right? We kind of need that iron fist, right? To just keep ourselves on track. And so we might have had a certain approach that really worked before we actually had the benefit of a fully formed executive lobe. So that's the first reason, Dave, why younger people might just kind of have that nervous energy and it works great. And then later in life, they end up needing to learn how to use it a little differently. The second reason is that we can actually almost get too good at our skills, right? So, for example, if you were 18 trying to make sure you didn't forget about your senior project, you might just kind of have a mental habit of saying, I've got to think about it all the time. I've got to always default to that topic. No time to think about anything else, just senior project all the time, right? And, or you might be kind of critical of yourself, right? Because at 18, one of the things that we need to do is we're actually more in a learning stage, 18, 19, 20, 21. So we might want to actually be a little hard on ourselves, just kind of maybe take that first opportunity to say, I really don't know what I'm doing here and I can't forget that, right? So what was once maybe a healthy recognition can actually become kind of a distorted inner critic as we get a little bit older. The
Mhm.
third and final reason I just want to mention, because I do see that phenomenon that you described, Dave, where people at a younger level kind of have a certain set of habits, cognitive habits that are working for them, and then it changes when they get older, is because of a concept called automatic thoughts, right? So if you used to just kind of have to remind yourself all the time, I don't really know what I'm doing, I have to stay humble or whatever. And that was maybe once a conscious automatic, or a conscious rather than automatic, a conscious thought that you were constantly trying to remind yourself of. You might have done such a good job that it became an automatic thought. An automatic thought is one that we no longer even consider. It's just part of our worldview. And maybe those automatic thoughts have become outdated because maybe you're now a leader in your industry. We still have to stay humble, for example, but not probably to the level as when we were 18. So the game changes as we get older, and we need to revise the way that we're thinking about our thought patterns.
It's fascinating. I I want to give you the opportunity. First of all, I very badly want people to buy this book, um, and really get the most out of it. You in the book, you really lay out kind of 9 different tools that we can use to harness, as we called it, nervous energy. I don't want to make you go through all 9 because frankly, I want to make sure that people go to the book and look at all 9. But give us a few. What are some of some of the tools that really we can use to harness nervous energy?
Sure. Well, one that I really like, that I was mentioning earlier, because a lot of high functioning people do have that really tenacious mind, is something called the mental shortlist, right? So, with the mental shortlist, what we do is we think of 5 things that would be really good for our mind to think about and focus on. We need a technique like the mental shortlist when we have gotten our minds stuck in a groove on something that we need to let go of, right? So, for example, suppose that you had this big conference that you're putting together, right? And
Mhm.
maybe you're just living and breathing and thinking about the conference like all the time. And then the day after the conference, it's no longer useful to keep asking yourself, should I have done this? Should I have done this? What about that? Why did I say this? Blah, 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 right? Now, there's a certain point where it's helpful to kind of, review and think about what you want to change. But then there comes a point where we're just ruminating. And when you realize you're just ruminating, that's the time for the mental shortlist, right? And the idea with the mental shortlist is that you do want to have 5 good, juicy topics, hopefully from a variety of domains in your life. So one might be, well, I'm going to start thinking about next year's conference. One might be, I'm going to get a jump on my holiday and anniversary, gift ideas. The other might be, I'm going to, think of all the new restaurants that I could take my wife to this weekend or whatever. Everybody's mental short list is going to be a little different, but you specifically do want to come up with 5 really good topics and write them down. The reason it's important to actually have a list is because when you're sitting here in your calm state of mind and you can come up with them and they sound good and interesting and you feel like, sure, I would think of those later. However, when we're under stress, our vision, our mental vision, as well as some studies have even shown our physical vision, can actually get more narrow. So in that moment when your mind just suddenly is like going haywire into an old habit of thinking about whether it be an ex, a relationship, anything that you know is just rumination territory for you, it'll be a lot harder in that moment to come up with other things to divert your mind onto. People get stuck in like the don't think about pink elephants thing. So the mental short list is a really nice way to divert yourself onto another topic.
Mm-hmm. That that's a great one. How often do you revise that list, by the way?
Everyone's different. There are certain items that are just going to always be good, right? Because the birthdays and anniversaries and holiday shopping, you have to get those again for people every year, right? So for some people, they know that that's always a good one. Other people have things on there like, run through my meditation exercises,
Mhm.
or, maybe planning next year's conference would always be kind of an evergreen topic as well. But I would say it's time to change them when you no longer find them stimulating. Your mental shortlist should be good. I like to compare it to like if you're an emotional eater, it's so much easier to put down the bag of Oreos if you have a fridge full of really good, wonderful snacks that you can try to have instead than if you're just sitting there with nothing but that bag of Oreos, right? So as soon as as soon as you get kind of sick of those snacks in the fridge and they don't feel exciting or interesting,
Mhm.
that's when it's time to refresh that mental menu on your mental short list.
Very good advice. So, what are some of the benefits that you've seen uh, in people who have learned, particularly the overachievers, who've learned to harness their nervous energy? What are some of the benefits that they enjoy?
Well, they actually become a lot more energy efficient, right? One of the benefits is that they just have more mental energy
Mhm.
because a lot of them were actually wasting a lot of energy on trying to block out the anxiety. As soon as they started to realize that they were getting at all anxious or nervous about something, they automatically registered that as a negative thing. And so they tried to stuff it down. And then they're actually wasting energy trying to stuff it down, and they're not giving themselves the opportunity to take healthy action around the anxiety, right? So another thing then, speaking of healthy action, is that people do then get the benefit of healthy action. One of the first steps, one of the first techniques in the book is actually an exercise that helps people to learn to study and evaluate what is it that is making them a little nervous or a little discombobulated per se, right?
Mhm.
So sometimes depending on the stressor, you might want to do a really good breathing and relaxing technique to just relax and let go, whereas other times you need a technique that's actually going to help you to focus on whatever the stressor is and to be undeterred by any distractions and to just laser beam in on it, right? And so for some people that just automatically say, oh, well, whenever I feel anxious, I do my relax and let go exercise, they're actually failing themselves. They're losing the opportunity to use that energy to be more effective on the stressors in their life, right? So, I mean, the benefits of learning how to evaluate your stressors and then take good action on them certainly reduces stress for people and makes them a lot more energy efficient. It also increases what psychologists call people's sense of self-efficacy, which is
Mhm.
their belief in themselves to be able to do the things that they need to do. You just feel more confident when you not only have a good toolbox, but you have a good understanding of which tool to use in which situation.
So I imagine you encounter a lot of people who are very confident and very accomplished in certain areas, but in other areas they're not. they're also areas where they know they need to pay attention. So hey, I'm very successful in my job. I make lots of money, but I really need to lose weight. Or I am incredibly good in maintaining my body. I've got an incredible physique, but I'm not so good about just organizing and planning my future or my life. So for those who avoid really, frankly, confronting those things that they're not good at because they excuse it by the thing that they are so good at, how do you help them build that bridge so that they really are looking at their whole being and saying, I really need to take all these things on? Does that question
Yeah.
make sense?
Oh, definitely. So a lot of high functioning people are kind of perfectionists, right? And I'm actually not here to knock perfectionism. I can be a perfectionist myself, right? So if we think about perfectionism as just a desire for excellence, I'm totally okay with that. But the time when it can become more of a hurdle than a helper is just like you said, Dave, if it comes to the point where our desire to do things so well causes us to back away from anything we don't do well because we can't tolerate not feeling like we're doing well at something. And so we only look at the areas of life where we do well. That's when we, again, deprive ourselves of the opportunity to learn and grow in other areas. There's some interesting studies about what psychologists call the need for achievement. So people with a high need for achievement compared to, say, people with what psychologists would categorize as a medium need for achievement. Believe it or not, people with a high need for achievement actually tend to achieve less in terms of complex goals than people with the medium need for achievement. And this
Fascinating.
is because people with the high need for achievement are so addicted to the hit of saying, yes, I did it, I achieved it, that they struggle to really grapple with kind of messing around and floundering and having a healthy struggle with something that they can't do right away, right? The people with the medium need for achievement are better able to tolerate that. And of course, it's that long-term grappling that's going to lead to the biggest growth. The good news is that once someone explains this to you and you realize it about yourself, then you can start changing your frustration tolerance and the way that you're looking at it when you find yourself struggling. So one simple way that I suggest in the book to change that for yourself is that when you notice yourself struggling, say with one of the techniques in the book, and these are skills, they do take a little effort to build. And so when you notice yourself, kind of backsliding or struggling a little bit, the first thing you should do is congratulate yourself, right? So you should say, wow, this is great that I noticed this, because awareness of a mistake compared to non-awareness of a mistake is actually a step in the right direction, right? So for those of us who have managed people, would you rather manage an employee who, when they make a mistake, are able to say, oops, I made a mistake. I want to look at that and figure out how that happened so that I can improve it? Or would you rather have an employee who is so frustrated by mistakes that they'll paper over it, they won't acknowledge it, or they'll just go do the stuff in the office that they're good at, right? We'd so much rather have the employee that's able to notice and talk about the mistakes, right? So we want to manage ourselves in the same way too. So the first thing we do want to do is congratulate ourselves. The other thing to remember is that, like you said, Dave, a lot of times these are people who are really good at other areas of their life. Instead of using that, like you said, as an excuse for the areas where we're not doing so well, which again, we shouldn't need an excuse, right? We should be congratulating ourselves for saying, oh, wow, here's an area of struggle for me, and I'm not walking away from it. I'm aware of it, and I'm going to focus on it, right? So we want to be able to greet that awareness in a positive way. But then we also want to remember the areas where we are strong. The reason is because those skills are often transferable, right? So when I would have someone come into my office that was really anxious, maybe they're struggling with panic attacks or whatever, and they feel like they're out of their depth, they don't know how to deal with this, I would often find the best way to kind of settle them down and get them ready to learn and grow would be to remind them, okay, well, you went to such and such school, you started such and such business, you did XYZ. This tells me that you're an intelligent person who knows how to learn new skills, who knows how to at least communicate with people on a pretty good basis, that you've accomplished these things in your life. So we can take those same skills and apply them to, learning and growing some other new skills that you just need to help you out with this one little area. One more thing I'll say about that, Dave, is as you mentioned, a lot of times we'll have these areas of our lives that we struggle with, even though we're maybe very accomplished. In my office, it was usually people that were very accomplished professionally, but when it comes to, say, personal relationships where they don't have as much control over it because you're dealing with another person, that's somewhat common, which is actually why my first book is Dr. Chloe's 10 Commandments of Dating. So if anyone's looking for kind of a nervous energy approach to dating, I do have Dr. Chloe's 10 Commandments of Dating as well.
Awesome. So a couple of final questions. You interact, you are an entrepreneur, a very successful one. You interact with a lot of entrepreneurs. Do you believe that harnessing nervous energy is a critical ingredient to entrepreneurial success?
I do. I believe it's a critical ingredient to entrepreneurial success as well as to fulfillment, right?
Mhm.
Because some of the exercises in the book are about recognizing that a lot of times underneath that anxiety is actually excitement, right? And so when we're constantly, pushing down that nervous energy or not knowing what to do with it, it's almost like we're disconnecting from our verve, like our kind of part of ourselves that brings us that sparkle and that excitement. And so part of the nervous energy is not only about being successful, which is great, but it's also about being fulfilled in the things that you're doing.
I notice myself, I know a number of entrepreneurs who have successfully exited their startup or their business, myself included. And once you're on the other side of that exit, you're almost like a professional athlete who retires. You're lost. You're really kind of lost because you've not done that work ahead of time to really kind of prepare yourself or be in a place, not prepare yourself, but be in a place where you're frankly a lot more self-aware of what got you to that wonderful point of exiting your startup. But then there is life after that, and you're going to have to be in a place where you can live it successfully. So that's encouraging to hear. And then I guess my last question is, do the attributes of nervous energy that really are kind of that you describe it in great detail, that exist inside a single being, have you observed that in teams or even in organizations where kind of the whole group is got super focused and super accomplished and really great, but then in their interactions with each other, they suffer from a lot of the things that are the downsides of nervous energy?
Yeah, definitely. That's such an interesting question. And I think that can happen sometimes again because nervous energy does tend to be present in people that can be a little bit of a perfectionist, right? And so when you have a bunch of perfectionists that are in a tight team, something else can come into play, which I think is very interesting. It's a psychology term called enmeshment. So enmeshment, like enmeshment, just to make sure everybody knows exactly like when two things become meshed together. Enmeshment in psychology is when two people or more in a relationship become so close that it's almost like I think you are me and you think that I'm you on a certain degree. It happens a lot in married couples too, but it can happen in teams as well. And so while it's positive to be super super close with your team, if we come to that point of enmeshment and then we're also perfectionists, what can happen is if I'm used to being really hard on myself and picking apart all my flaws to the point where I almost kind of pride myself on it, I
Mhm.
might start doing that to you too, because I'm almost viewing you like an extension of me, right? And so learning as a team to think about the nervous energy techniques and to think about that concept of enmeshment and how we can have our autonomy while we're still working together as a team can be, again, really enriching, not only in terms of success, but in terms of better relationships and fulfillment and making ourselves energy efficient as a team.
I love that phrase, by the way, energy efficient, because I think we're um, so many who are viewing this are they're pragmatists. They are, really interested in the economy of their work and of their lives, and to really term this in the form of efficiency is really, I think, fantastic. Um, Listen, first of all, for those who stayed through this, and I hope there are many who stayed through it throughout, I will buy you this book happily. Just email me, David B to SMBI, and I will happily buy you this book in either Kindle form, hardback form, whatever form it comes in, because I sincerely believe that it has been so enlightening to read it, and it's been so helpful to read it that I would like it to I would like it to be like Johnny Appleseed everywhere and everyone reading it. But equally, I want to give an opportunity for people to buy the book themselves. So how do they do that?
Sure. Well, first of all, Dave, that is so kind of you to make that offer to people. That is really kind of you. I'm really glad. And I would love to for the book to be like Johnny Appleseed, that people just have read it everywhere. So you can get it at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever books are sold.
Mhm.
Nervousenergybook.com has more, but you can just go straight to Amazon or wherever you get your books. And it's available in Kindle, hardback, and actually audiobook as well, which I really like sometimes too, because as a psychologist, we're into this thing called modeling. And it's not like fashion modeling, but it's the idea that when you see and hear and observe another person saying or doing the things that you're trying to take on, for some people that's easier to absorb, or they're trying to reduce their screen time, or maybe listen to it in their commute. So whatever way, I mean, I'm a big one for reading books too, like paperback books. So
Mhm.
whatever works for people.
Terrific. I hope you do a TED Talk. You deserve one, and I think that it's just been fascinating to talk to you. Thank you so much for bringing this to our audience, who are immersed in all sorts of different presentations on strategy and marketing and selling and technology and tools. And to hear this is such a great. It's just such a great kind of interruption to all of that really is so valuable to all of us. Thank you so much for doing this.
Well, thank you. In fact, I'd have to say, I appreciate you saying that. The Macmillan Speakers Bureau is actually now representing me, and they would love for me to get in front of a large group of people. So if anybody does have any good connections to any big TED Talks or whatever else, I'd be interested.
Terrific. That's great. Thank you, Dr. Chloe.
Thank you so much, Dave. Take care.
You
Bye.
too.